Hi, I'm Tom Wishon, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about one of the most confusing areas to golfers, the role of the golf shaft in the performance of the shot and in club fitting technology. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've heard people talk about the fact that they believe that the golf shaft is the most important component in the whole golf club. Sometimes they refer to it by saying the shaft is the engine of the golf club. Well, the point is the shaft plays kind of a very unusual role in the golf club in that it is more important for certain golfers depending on their swing characteristics, but then not as important for other golfers depending on their swing characteristics. At best, the shaft probably should be referred to more along the lines as being the transmission of the golf club. You, the golfer, are the engine. You're providing the power. The shaft is there to help transmit that power to the club head, to the shot, to be able to come up with the best results for your swing. First of all, we look at 5 different characteristics or 5 different design specifications of a golf shaft. You have the weight of the golf shaft. You have the overall flex of the golf shaft, which basically we talk about today as a swing speed rating for the shaft. You have the bend profile of the golf shaft, which is the distribution of the stiffness over the whole length of the shaft. You have the torsional stiffness, or what a lot of people refer to as the torque, or the resistance to twisting that's designed into the shaft. And then you also have something called the weight distribution of the shaft. Which section of the shaft may be heavier or lighter than the other over its length, and what that has to do to performance. So those are the 5 key elements that determine how any one shaft differs from another. The weight of the shaft, the overall flex of the shaft, the bend profile, the torsional stiffness or torque, and the weight distribution or the balance point of the shaft with this. Okay, well, how do they all go together, and how do you know which shaft is right for you in your golf clubs? Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about what the shaft actually does during the golf swing, okay? For one, you know, the shaft obviously bends in different directions during the golf swing under the load of your swing, okay? But primarily what the shaft does to contribute to the shot is, number one, through the weight of the shaft. The weight of the shaft is the number one controlling element of the total weight of the golf club. And total weight is one of the 2 weight factors in the golf club that has to be fit correctly to each golfer's combination of strength, downswing force, tempo, and very important for many golfers, their sense of feel. And the idea is if you get the weight of the shaft matched correctly to these elements of the golf swing, the strength, the downswing force, the overall swing tempo, and the sense of feel, then the golfer's swing tempo, timing, and rhythm will be more consistent. He won't be falling into traps where he says, if I could just slow this down a little bit, I could hit the shot right. Well, that kind of utterance, about your shot results is basically a symptom to say maybe something in the golf club is a little too light if you're struggling with trying to slow down and achieve your proper swing tempo. On the other hand, it could be that after 20 balls in a bucket of balls, you start getting a little bit tired and you're having to make more of a physical effort to swing the golf club. That can be an indication that the weight of the shaft is too heavy, thus causing the total weight of the golf club to be too heavy for your actual combination of strength and downswing force and swing tempo with this. So the weight of the shaft is very important with regard to helping you with your on-center hit consistency, your swing tempo repeatability, your swing timing and rhythm for overall shot consistency. Well, then we get into the bending characteristics of the shaft. Okay, what does the shaft do during the swing to influence the shot through its stiffness design, its overall flex, and its bend profile or distribution of stiffness? And this is exactly where the shaft begins to split in terms of what golfer types it does add to performance or have a bigger role in the performance of the shot versus other golfers where it's of less importance in the actual shot performance. It goes like this. The more aggressive the downswing tempo, the higher the club head speed, and the later the unhinging of the wristcock release, the more the flex design of the shaft will have a role in the shot performance. okay? So it works like this. When we swing the club and we get to the top of the backswing and we have a certain amount of wristcock angle depending on our swing characteristics, once we start the club down, as long as we're holding and retaining that wristcock angle, the arms and the club are moving at exactly the same velocity or speed. Okay, well, at some point in the downswing, we begin to unhinge the wristcock angle. And when that happens, where we begin to unhinge the wristcock angle, energy is sent from the body and the arms to the golf club. So at this point, the club begins to speed up, and the arms and the hands begin to slow down on the downswing. That's right, that happens because once we begin to unhinge the wristcock angle, we're sending energy from the arms to the club to help the club speed up. And since the arms are giving up their energy, they can't maintain their same speed, so they begin to slow down. But our hands are still holding on to the club. So in essence, our hands are somewhat now, because they're slowing down, they're somewhat retarding the acceleration and the velocity of the club. Well, as the club now begins to speed up after we release the club, while the hands and arms are hanging onto it, what happens is all of this weight in the end of the golf club, in the club head, begins to push forward against the hands that are holding the golf club and slowing down during the downswing. So the mass of the head begins to push the shaft into a forward bend position. Okay, I'm over accentuating it so you can see this. So at the end of the release, when we've finished our wristcock release fully on the downswing, that's when the club goes into its most forward bend position. Okay, but as you're well aware, there are some golfers who unhinge the wristcock early, midway, and some who can hold on to the wristcock angle until very late in the downswing. When we release the club is when the club is at its full forward bend position in the shaft. So for early release players, for midway release players, the shaft goes into its forward bend position well before the club head gets to impact. And it only stays there for a very short period of time before it then rebounds back to straight. For the late release golfer who unhinges the wristcock angle very late in the downswing, this is when the club head gets to the ball and the shaft is in its full forward bend position. And this is how the flex design of the shaft can contribute to the performance of the shot. If you can deliver the club head with the shaft still in a forward bend position at the time you hit the ball, this forward bend position is actually increasing the loft of the club head very, very slightly by tilting the club head more up. And so the more forward bend you get in the shaft at the moment of impact, the higher the launch angle, and with it, the greater amount of spin. So this is the shaft's flex's main contribution to the shot. Through different combinations of stiffness design versus the golfer's release and strength and speed, the shaft can add a little bit to the launch angle and to the spin characteristics of the shot. So, but again, it's not going to do this unless you release the club later and later and later in the downswing. Thus, for the golfers who have an early release to midway release, the shaft gets into a forward bend position too soon, then rebounds back straight, and thus for the early to midway release golfer, the shaft's flex and bend profile really do not have any substantial effect on the shot performance. And therefore, in a fitting situation, for the early to midway release player, this is where all of the other fitting parameters, like the lengths, the lofts, the face angles, the total weight, of course, the swing weight, all of the other specifications of the club become more important for shot success through proper fitting for the golfer who unhinges the wristcock angle early to midway in the downswing. But then as the golfer, you find golfers who release the club a little bit later to very late. On a progressive basis, now the flex and bend profile begin to show a little bit more and more of a dramatic effect on the shot. So as the golfer's club head speed increases, as their downswing acceleration increases, as their downswing aggressiveness and transition force increases, and as their release is later, The shaft now adds to all the other elements of the fitting specs in the club to also be a very important part in the shaft fitting with this. So when we fit shafts, for example, I've been asked the question several times. Okay, Tom, so for the early to midway release player, you don't worry at all about what shaft flex you fit them into any? No, I'm just saying that it's not going the flex and bend profile are not going to show up as having a big effect on the shot, but you still fit the early to midway release player as if he is a late release, higher club head speed player. You want to do the best job you can at matching the flex to their swing speed, to their downswing force, to their point of release, and the reason is for enhancing the impact feel. See, how many of you have ever hit clubs with shafts that you knew right away were too stiff for you in your swing? I'm sure it's happened a lot, okay? What have you sensed? Okay, one of the biggest things that you can, that tells you that a shaft is too stiff for you is that when you hit the shot, it feels kind of dead. It feels kind of boardy. It doesn't feel like the ball jumps off the face, okay? That happens because of the way the vibrations of impact in the club head are transmitted up the shaft back to the golfer. Shafts that are too stiff will transmit more of a dead, boardy, unsolid feel than shafts that are much more flexible. So any golfer, regardless of their ability when they release the club, needs to be sure that when they hit the ball in the center of the face that they get the most solid feel that they possibly can. And that's the reason why when fitting the golfers with an early to midway release, we still fit them as if the flex is just as important for the very late release player with a more aggressive downswing coming into the ball. So those are the elements that we're looking at in professional shaft fitting. We need to fit the weight of the shaft to help control the total weight of the golf club to get that match to your strength, your tempo, your sense of timing, so you can achieve the highest level of swing repeatability and swing consistency. That's the shaft weight. The combination of the overall flex with the bend profile, we still fit as well as we can to all golfers regardless of their swing characteristics, but we understand that as the golfer's club head speed increases, as their downswing force increases, and as their wrist cock release becomes later, that's when the flex and the bend profile begin to step in to have more of an influence on the performance of the shot. The other elements in the shaft, the torsional stiffness, we do not really look at fitting torque in the shaft as a separate factor like the way we do shaft weight, shaft flex, and shaft bend profile. The reason is because torque has really become not much of a fitting factor. The reason is simply because the shaft manufacturers and shaft designers understand that they need to design the torsional stiffness of a shaft to match with its flex and bend profile. And thus you're going to find as shafts get stiffer, the stiffer flexes and the stiffer tip section designed shafts are going to automatically have lower degrees of torque, while those shafts that are much more flexible and more tip flexible are going to be designed with a slightly higher degree of torque. But you rarely run into shafts from X to L where the torque variation would be much more than 2.5 degrees in the stiffer shafts, up to about 5.5 degrees in the less stiff shafts, okay? It's basically built in. Torque is a factor, a design factor in shafts that's built in pretty much in correspondence with the flex and the bend profile. So we don't have to look at torque as a separate fitting factor. Very, very rarely would you ever find a situation where once you did the right job of fitting the flex and the bend profile of the golfer, you would rarely ever find that the torque was wrong for the golfer at the same time. The final one, the weight distribution or balance point of the shaft, this too is basically a non-issue in fitting. It's more of an issue to the club makers when they build the golf club, because they will know that shafts that are more tip heavy require a little less head weight to achieve a certain desired swing weight, and shafts that are more butt heavy may require just slightly a few more grams in the head to reach a specific swing weight in the build out of the golf clubs. So when it comes down to it, the professional club fitters are looking at your swing to analyze your club head speed, your downswing force, your tempo, your point of release, and then they will interview you to find out whether or not you have definite preferences, likes and dislikes for the bending feel of a shaft. And from there, they go to work to take a look at everything and begin to recommend the right shaft for your swing in your golf clubs. And that is pretty much the role of the shaft in the golf club. It's not the engine, it's more the transmission. It is not the most important component in the golf club. It is part of the whole that contributes, along with all the other specifications, to the properly fit golf club for each golfer.